I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad that it's a day to come around this table. I started thinking about the table and the uniqueness of it, and I looked at the lectionary passage today, and it sort of began to direct me to what I want to share with you today. And I want to start off like this. Many of you in the room, I'm looking around, I see you've taken the Alpha course, and you know in the Alpha course, it's all about asking questions. In the Alpha course, we love questions. All types, all kinds of questions. And we would say so emphatically that there are absolutely no stupid or dumb questions. We invite that exploration. However, the internet is not the Alpha course, which means people do ask or at least categorize really silly questions. So I want to share with you today, to begin, 5 of the most ridiculous questions that people have asked on the internet. Now, no, I took a test. I sampled a survey. No one in here responded to any of these. They don't belong to this congregation. No one in here would ask these questions. But they did appear on the internet. The top 5 most ridiculous questions asked. First of all is this: do you think humans will ever walk on the sun? I don't know. Things are possible. Was The Lion King based on a true story? This is a good one. I'm sorry. It's bad when you know the punchline before it gets there. If Batman's parents died, then how was he born? Oh. So these are real questions. These aren't made up. If airplanes fly, follow the logic, right? Why don't we take them to Mars and stuff instead of making rockets that cost tons of money? I mean, kind of, sort of logical, kind of, sort of. And maybe my favorite, is Christian Bale a Christian since his name is Christian? So 5 of the greatest really ridiculous questions asked on the internet. However, because of the intellect of this congregation, I can just sense the intelligence. It's just flowing out of you right now. So I know you didn't ask those, but many of you are aware of the 5 greatest questions in life. Not the most ridiculous ones, but the greatest questions. So here's your test, because someone in here is going to know it. What do we call the 5 great questions? Sin boldly. Somebody knows, they just don't want to say. You know, in school, the teacher would ask the question, and I knew the answer. And I would never say it. I was always afraid of being wrong. And almost always I was right. So I'm telling you, trust yourselves. So it's called the 5 WS's. You ever heard of the 5 W's? The 5 W's, right? Okay, now you know, the 5 W's, right? I should have raised my hand. So the 5 W's are questions whose answers are considered the starting place. If you want to discover information, if you want to solve a problem, you go through these 5 W's. And this is what research companies do, police investigations, journalism is supposed to do. It's supposed to go through these WS's. I just threw that in there. It didn't say that in the... If you're watching, if you get the sermon notes, you'll notice that line. I probably won't use that next time. So they constitute this formula, right? It's this formula that we work through to get the complete story on something. And according to the principle of the 5 W's, a report can only be considered complete if it asks all of these. So what are they? As if by magic, there they are on the screen. Who? Now you know, right? Those are the 5 W's. Who was involved? What happened? Where did it take place? When did it take place? And why did it happen? But if you've never heard of the 5 WS's, I have a Joe Wendorph version of the 5 WS's, and it goes just like this.
5 W, Five W's. You can't tell a story without five W's. Who? A story needs a who, like a grandma or a dog or even you. What? A story needs a what, like a birthday party or the fish you caught. Where? The story needs a where, like your bedroom at the beach or over there.
I think you get the point, right? Do we need to play the whole song? Yes. Linda's saying yes. Please play the
story needs a win, like this morning or on Tuesday or back then. Oh, why? The story needs
You're saying, why is this going on so long? Why did he even put that out there? So now you get it. Now do you understand the five W's or the WS's, right? So the first question of the five W's or the WS, the five WS's, is absolutely key for us. At least anybody on the journey of exploring the Christian faith. If you're there, it's key. If you're on the journey, it's key. The first of the WS's is what? Come on, we just did a silly song about it. Who, right? Who? I want to look at a way of walking through the five W's today with a lectionary passage. It comes out of Luke in chapter 9, but we're gonna give it a little context as we go through. The first occasion of the first WS that I want to look at today, just a little bit before our election today, and it's a passage, it's a little interplay that's happening with Herod, and you've heard this a bit before, probably. If not, here you go. Now, Herod is hearing lots of things about Jesus, and the scriptures say he'd heard of all that was taking place. Jesus was doing amazing things, saying amazing things. He was attracting a crowd, which attracted Herod's attention. And so Herod was a bit perplexed. He's perplexed about this guy. So he wants to ask the first W. Who, right? He says, who is this Jesus guy? And so he's asking this to some of the people surrounding him, some of the information gatherers. And so they say, well, some people say that he's John the Baptist, who's come back from the dead. Some say he's Elijah. And if you know your Old Testament prophetic history, Elijah was to be the precursor to Christ. If Elijah came back and appeared on the scene, it was kind of a cue that Messiah was on the way. So they're reporting to Herod. Some people think it's Elijah, or it's just some old prophet, right? It's a famous, wise old prophet. One of those categories is kind of what people are saying. Herod hears that, and Herod says, well, I know about John. Herod had a little something to do about John. So, yeah, it's not John. I dealt with him. He's off the scene. But there must be something more to this Jesus fella. I need to seek him out for myself, right? So he wanted to see him. He wanted to find out who he was. That's the first occasion of the first W. The second occasion of the first W comes from Jesus himself. Now, this is just a little bit later on. Jesus is asking this who question. He says, who are people saying that I am? Right? Herod says, who is he? Now, Jesus himself is saying, who are people saying that I am? Now, listen to the answers once again. Very interesting. Some say that you're John the Baptist, come back from the dead. Sound familiar? Some say that you're Elijah, and some say you're one of the prophets of old. Does that sound a little familiar? It should. It's exactly the same responses that Herod got. So there you go. Now, third occasion of the first W. Once again, comes from Jesus. First one, Herod is asking. Second, Jesus is asking his little team, what are people saying? The third occasion, it's coming again from Jesus, but this time he's not asking what people are saying. He's asking his closest friends, his followers, the disciples. He's asking them directly. Now, who do you say? I want you to answer the first W. Who? Who am I? And if you read the passage, it's you should know this well. Peter, after folks are kind of like, do I raise my hand? Will I get it wrong? I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to put myself out there or not. So Peter finally, boldly kind of screams out, you're the one. The answer to the who is you're the anointed one. You're the Christ of God. In other words, you're Messiah. You are the one that scriptures have talked about. You are the one, and you've come now. Now, I don't know how you're feeling about this point, but when I got to this point in the message, I thought, there's so much whoing going on in this whole story that you might think that we're either at an owl convention or we're at the Grinchmas at Universal. It's all about the who's. Come on. Okay. So that's the first level, the who. And you've heard the answers. We just went through the answers in 3 different areas. Jesus is the one who answers the what, the second question, the second level question of the W's. Remember who, what. Jesus says, here's what's going to happen to Messiah. The Messiah will suffer greatly, be rejected by all the pastors, the clergy types. They would have said the priests and religious leaders. All the leadership, all the religious leadership in the country was going to reject Messiah. Messiah would be killed and would rise again on the 3rd day. What? That's what was going to happen. The third WS, we did the who, right? What? Now where? Where? It shows up in our passage for today, and that is in Luke 9:28 through 36. Luke 9:28 through 36. Again, this should be familiar to many of us. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, John, and James, and they went up on a mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly they saw 2 men. Pay attention, this part is really important. Who shows up? This is the mountaintop. It's the classic name for this is what? Transfiguration. Today happens to be Transfiguration Sunday. Imagine that. So they're on the mountaintop, and here's what happens. 2 other people show up, Moses and Elijah. Who was Moses? One of the prophets of old. Who was Elijah? Well, Elijah was a prophet also. So Moses and Elijah show up, and they're talking to Jesus. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. Some say it must have been in the middle of the night that all of this happened. But since they stayed awake, they saw his glory, and the 2 men stood with him. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it's good for us to be here. We'll make 3 special little honoring dwellings, 3 little markers, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Not knowing what he said, he's not really thinking this through very well. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. They're on a mountaintop. Some of the mountaintops in Israel, misty clouds would come through, so here comes the cloud. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Let's stop right there. So who, what will happen, and the when. The big reveal. The when happened on the mountaintop. Did you notice the characters once again? Elijah, the precursor to Messiah. Moses, one of the prophets of old, who lays down the law. He brings the law off the mountaintop, right? Now the fourth. We did who, what, where. When. When? When did it take place? I'm sorry? Right, you were listening, Kurt. Very good, but that's not where I'm going. But you get an A+ star for being bold and speaking out. It was a correct answer, but we're going to look at a different question. The fourth question. In Exodus 34, Moses is bringing down the tablets, right? He goes up on it where? A mountaintop. Kind of this mystical place where magical things happen and God seems to be moving and acting. And he comes down from the mountaintop with two things, two tablets. And on the tablets are what? God's law we call, 10 Commandments, 10 Commandments. But if you notice what it says about Moses, again, it's interesting to pay attention to these stories. They happen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years apart. Yet Moses comes down off the mountain, and they said his face was shining. His appearance had changed, right? His face was shining because he had been talking with God. The lawgiver comes, lays down the law. But the law is heavy, not just because it's stone tablets. It's heavy on the people. They have a hard time. We have a hard time with keeping up. Now, I want to look back at Luke 9:28, I just read to you, that scene on the mountaintop. Who was Jesus? Do you see any similarities with the Moses story? Jesus, his appearance had changed. His clothing was shiny. It's a little bit like what happened with Moses. But listen to this part. This is the incredible comparison. There are some things similar to what happened with Moses on the mountaintop, but here comes Jesus, shiny-faced, shunned one. He's the one that would be shunned, who carries the law, but where does Jesus carry the law? He buries it down in the grave. Moses presents the law, and it's heavy on the shoulders of the people. Jesus buries the law. The one who will lay heavy consequences, consequential burdens, right? Moses, heavy consequential burdens, lays down. Jesus takes them upon himself down to the grave, and it says he'll rise in 3 days. He's raised up into abundant life. And that's really what this table before me, we call it the communion table. It's what it's about. You know, there's something like this in every Christian church, has some form. The Catholics, Episcopalians would call it an altar. We call it a communion table. It all represents the same thing. And every Christian church has this idea of something being buried and something being raised up. But we still, with this marker, with this clue, with these words, we have a little bit of a problem being very, very clear about who Jesus is, who he was, and who he is to come. And we go, oh, we know that. We know the answers, Pastor Joe. I don't know. I don't know that we fully understand that. And sometimes those answers to the who and the what, where, why, sometimes those answers come from very peculiar sources. So I want to let you hear from a man as we get ready to come to this table. His name is Mordecai Baleston. Now, the thing you need to know about Mordecai is he was Jewish and was raised in a Jewish family. But I want you to hear his answer to the first WS.
53rd chapter of Isaiah. It is astonishing. If you would just read that chapter, just without the Bible being around it, you would say, oh, this is some Christian Bible. This is Jesus. When you realize, though, that it's in the middle of our Bible, our Jewish Bible. When I first came to faith, I dared not tell my father, because this is a time period in the 1970s when there were lots of gurus and cults. And he was very concerned about me getting involved in some crazy sect and going off someplace. So I waited for months. And when I finally told him, he was very skeptical. On his own then, he started to read about Jesus as well. About a year and a half later, I told him that the fellow who wrote one of the books that he had read, that this fellow was giving a lecture in the city of New York. And he agreed to come out to hear that person. And one of the most amazing moments of my life was the speaker said, "Would everyone here who is a Jewish believer in Jesus, would you raise your hand?" And I raised my hand. My father also raised his hand. And I looked over and I said, "Pop," he didn't say would all the Jews raise their hand. He said, "Would all the Jewish believers in Jesus raise their hand?" And my father looked over and he said, "Yes, I heard what he said." The decision to come to faith in Jesus as the Messiah was not something that was a momentary lark. It wasn't something that was a passing fad. And I could see changes in myself that I knew were not from within myself. I had kind of tapped in to a truth for our Jewish people that was very powerful.
So Mordecai found his answer to the who. Who was Jesus? Herod asked it. Jesus asked it of his friends. And he asked the same question to us. Who is he? Who do you say that he is? So as you come to this table today, Jesus is asking you, as you take these steps, to answer the question. He wants to know, as you step forward, who do you say that I am? Because it makes a huge difference in the power of this table to change lives like it did for Mordecai. So I'll leave you with this, a quote from C.S. Lewis. He said, "Don't use words that are too big for the subject. In other words, don't exaggerate. Save the big words for the important occasions." He says, don't say infinitely when you mean very, right? Infinitely when you mean very. Otherwise, you'll have no word left when you want to talk about something really infinite. And what we're talking about today, or better phrased, who we're talking about today, is the infinite one. Jesus, the anointed one, the Savior, the chosen one, the one that the voice says, listen to. Listen to this one. So let's take in Jesus' meal in this moment, and let's listen. Would you join me in prayer?